Discussing Alberto Giacometti, a biography, a book by James Lord, also discussing a movie, The Final Portrait, which is a section of Giacometti's life, a particular section where he draws a portrait, and it's about that person that is being portrayed, and the whole movie is a pretty subtle endeavor to show the personality of Alberto Giacometti. And I think the purpose of the biography and the movie, and by the way, also my discussion here, is really to try to analyze Giacometti as an artist and to try to analyze also art as through the lens of Giacometti. I think this is the best way to do this. And that's, by the way, the reason I read this book is because I personally like Giacometti's art. I'm attracted to it. I like to own some of it, not just for financial reasons, but also aesthetic reasons. And that's why I was drawn towards his biography. The book itself, I would say it's not the best biography. I'm not a big fan of biographies, just simply because I think biographers often make their lives very easy by really sticking to facts and history and not really spending enough time on narratives and the craft of writing. And the person that wrote Hamilton, for example, or J.P. Morgan, to me, that's a great biographer because he's really a novelist. I mean, he might be writing something that actually happened, but I'm a big believer in there's no difference in the genre of novel or biography or autobiography or whatever. It doesn't really matter. I mean, stories are stories, and the writing is the same. I don't care if it was true or not. You can write a fictional biography of an artist, Alberto Giacometti. There's a biography I read a long time ago, which is about Michelangelo, and it wasn't really a biography. I think it was more like a sort of a fictional biography. So it was a story embedded in maybe true facts here and there, but it was more of a fictional character development, and to me that's a lot more interesting. I think it's okay to stick to the facts. I mean, you don't have to develop a new character, but put yourself in the shoes of a novelist. You know, it's like try to appreciate the art of writing, which in my point of view is transcendent. It doesn't matter which genre. That's just marketing stuff, you know. Again, like I like biographies, or I like nonfiction, or that kind of stuff. To me, that really doesn't make any sense because, again, writing is writing, and the narratives and character developments, they apply to biographies as much as they apply to novels. Nevertheless, this is just a prelude, so I'm going to discuss this a little bit more. What I want to point out here is that we in the podcast series, Not in the Wrong podcast series, we discuss books that we read, and like I said, also we discuss movies, we even discuss shows, we discuss all kinds of things that are maybe not related directly to the hedge fund business, but like we said many times before, reading is not just a pastime of hedge fund managers, it is part of the job because it is conditioning of the mind the same way an MMA artist, a mixed martial artist trains her conditioning and strength, a boxer or whoever, a soccer player. They don't just train their craft. They don't just hone their technical skills. They spend a lot of time also training their bodies to be flexible, increase mobility, increase strength. And this is exactly what reading does to the brain or to the nervous system. And I think that's very important because in the knowledge business, you have to have that flexibility. You have to have all these skills. You have to have the strength, the flexibility, the persistence, the stamina to think a problem through. And then you also want to get inspired. Oh, that's a dangerous word, but you want to try to stimulate your neurons in a way that maybe new thoughts come out, maybe ideas crystallize a little bit more, or maybe even pop up. This is Not in the Wrong podcast. It's February 19th, 2023. This is Krim Delco. It's a weekend. There's no update. for the year were up 72%. The market is up 6.3%. We're outperforming by 65.7%. Let me start with the biography. So Alberto Giacometti, biography by James Lord. The book goes back from his childhood all the way to his later years as an artist, and portrays the development, the evolution of a person. This happens to be an artist, and it portrays the evolution of an artist. And Lord makes an effort to bring in, let's say, art historic artifacts into the narrative. So there are explanations of how Giacometti sees reality, of how he feels towards, expressing his vision in art. So there's all these things that you might read in a sort of at a vernissage of an art show, where the curator tries to explain the purpose of the art and why it is being exposed the way it is exposed, and why it actually happened, and all those kinds of things. So I think it's also a historical analysis of what actually happened in his life. There's things like he grew up in a small valley in the Bergaglia between Italy and Switzerland. He's actually Swiss Italian, so he which is pretty important when it comes to things like World War II, where he was kind of living through, and those sort of things. But he really spent most of his life in Paris, and it's also a nice portrait of Paris as the cultural center and the center of the arts in the early 20th century. There are sections in the book that describe his relationship with, let's say, Picasso and other infamous artists. But I think, look, what is this all about, right? I mean, you're looking at an artist that has gained a lot of fame. So you can look at this book as an answer to the question, well, what is an important artist? And actually, the book offers answers on that front, because this is very much in line of Tom Wolfe's The Painted Word, which I think is one of the most important, if not the most important art book that I've ever read. And it's not even an art book. It's written by a journalist. Actually, Tom Wolfe's a journalist. But again, an interesting sort of tangent here that a journalist and not an art person actually describes what art is the best. So what is the Painted Book? What is the Painted Word? What is this whole idea of, let's say, what am I trying to say here? If you look at the main message of the Painted Word is that art, the way we perceive it, is incredibly, is deeply influenced by what we write about it, and that what we observe is theory laden. This goes even back to David Deutsch. So what we observe, what we actually see, is incredibly theory laden. So it matters what we think about something when we see it. And why is that important? Well, it puts the observation in a very different light. It puts the observation in a context of logic, of understanding, of theory, if you want. So this is, the same way science is theory law, in the same way observation starts with a theory, and then we pay attention to what we see through theory, and then we change our theory through what we see. So it's a reciprocal process, and the same applies to the arts. So this is what I think Giacometti as a portrait, Giacometti as a biography really is able to get through. So this is definitely a great achievement of the book. I don't know if James Lord attempted to actually do that, if it was his goal to support the idea that the arts is very much what we think and not just what we see, because it really comes across in Giacometti. Now, the way it comes across in Giacometti is, I would say, sort of in a negative way, negative meaning sort of in a photographic sense, negative, meaning it's not showing positively what he meant art should be, but more in a sort of what he meant art shouldn't be, or what made him unhappy about his art. And to me, that was a really important revelation. And now that I'm connecting the dots here between David Deutsch, the idea that observations are theory laden, which I think is a really fundamental revelation. It's a very, very deep, fundamental revelation that you have observation in science. So let's stick with science for a second. I'll get back to art. So you have science, which is empirical, and you might think, well, all you need to do is just look. And that in itself is already a contradiction, because what does it mean to look? Well, to look means to develop instruments that help us look. Developing instruments requires theory, requires technology, and that's already a proof that just looking by itself doesn't really do anything. You have to have a theory of what you see. You know, I just read an article about protons and how we think about protons. Well, it takes, you know, hadron colliders and all that kind of stuff to be even in a position to split a proton into its components, and then start thinking about what they could represent and so on and so forth. So it takes in, and maybe those are the wrong instruments. Maybe we should have different instruments. But again, observations are theory laden. Let's get back to the art world of Giacometti. The same applies to Giacometti. He was very dissatisfied with his art because he was really uncomfortable with the filter that his eyes and his brain put between him and his art. And by the way, that comes across in the other piece that I'm discussing here, which is the movie, The Final Portrait. So in that movie, that is absolutely crucial, where the artist and the actor who plays the art, it doesn't matter, where Giacometti, he is continuously dissatisfied with the portrait. And the reason he's dissatisfied, he's not saying it explicitly, but what he's saying is that he's just unhappy with what he sees. But then he knows that what he sees influences him, that it puts him in a position of bias. And he doesn't want to be biased because he wants some sort of purity out of his piece. But that's the struggle, and the whole movie is about that. And then you know, it shows maybe the dark side of Giacometti's personality, which, by the way, I also don't agree with the way it's portrayed. At least his personality is portrayed as, you know, quite frankly, excuse my French, he's just an asshole. He's an asshole, an egotistic asshole. He disrespects women. He disrespects people and all that kind of stuff. But that's okay. It's okay. I'm not, you know, I think I'm a big believer in separating pieces of work from the people. The same applies to writers, athletes, any kind of important person, or any kind of achievement that people are able to perform in life. I think I always separate the person from the achievement, because there's no relationship. Why should a successful athlete also be a nice person? I don't care. The same way, by the way, the other way around. If I meet a nice person, they don't necessarily have to be a successful athlete to be even nicer. I don't care. So you know, if you can give me one quality, if you're a good artist, if you're a nice person, if you're a good writer, if you know, let's say Cormac McCarthy, I don't even know him. I just saw an interview with him, and honestly, I'm not a big fan of that interview. I mean, he seems fine, but he's not the most interesting person actually to talk to. Maybe it's his age. I don't care. But his books, I love them. You know, The Passenger, I said it's one of the most important books I've actually read, and one of the books of I would say I've considered it the book of this century. Now it's early, and I'm sure there's going to be more, but this is definitely one of those like sort of grapes of wrath type books. So again, what I'm trying to say here is I'm separating the person from the earth. Let's get back to Giacometti. So he struggles with representing his art in a way that is acceptable to him. This is the key. How can I develop a piece of art in a way that I'm not biased by my thoughts, by my eyes, by my feelings, by all that kind of stuff? I think this is really the struggle of Giacometti over at least a big part of his artistic career. He tries to deal with the reciprocity of looking at something, feeling about something, then creating something, and then feeling about it again. So he tries to deal with that by trying to explain to himself what it actually means. The representation of art is not what you see, it's what you feel it should represent. And then you try to sort of catch that moment of representation and not just what you see. It becomes very abstract. And I think the reason it's so abstract is simply because words, language is not very good at expressing what we consider art. To use Karl Popper, if I read from right to left here, art is the thing that we express that cannot be expressed with words. I think that's really what art is. So we try to express stuff and we can't do it with words. And then we use other things, or let's say the visual arts at least. So now, I'm getting entangled in definitions already. I don't want to do that. My point here is that, a Giacometti sculpture is trying to represent something that cannot be represented by words. And therefore, we have to use something else. And that something else is what an artist struggles. And, there's some skill involved, of course. But in Giacometti's case, the skill is actually not even that great. I mean, yeah, it's all right. I wouldn't say it's not the kind of skill that a Rodin or a Michelangelo had to express. It's a different type of skill, but still amazing. I think to finish this episode, maybe I want to just say a few words about my feelings about art in general and why I'm very interested in art, or I spend quite some time with art in one way or the other. There's two museums here in Palo Alto at Stanford on the campus that I'm very, very lucky to be able to visit. They're free. You can go, and most of the stuff they have is not very interesting, but there's a Seurat sculpture there, which I like. And then there's a Jackson Pollock painting, which I adore. So that's, to me, that's it's almost as up there with the nature around us. In other words, if people, let's say, ask me, what do you like about living in California, Northern California, I would say, well, it's certainly the nature. I mean, the nature is beyond explanation. It's one, I can't even find words to explain how spectacular the nature is around here. And then I think having access to pieces of art at the level of Jackson Pollock or Seurat is also up there. It's maybe not as spectacular, or having the Sierra Nevada just a couple hours from here, but it's still it's up there. So I just want to mention that as a sort of prelude to this discussion of what does art mean. And I think it's like I said, it's a way to engage with my nervous system, my intellect, my brain, but it's not just my brain, obviously. It's a lot more than that. And it's other people's way to express themselves that is manifests itself in those pieces of art, and then that sort of comes across to me. And that process is very interesting. It fuels something in me. I don't like the word inspiration, but it's what common language would say. It's inspiring. I would use other words, but that's for another time. So let's stay with Giacometti here and the art world. So like I said, this conversation is in context with the painted word of Tom Wolfe. I think again, the painted word is to me it's the Bible of art. Like if you ask me what art is, read the painted word. What it says is simply that we see art through the words that we read, and we read the words through the art that we see. So it's a reciprocal process that observationist theory, laden, it applies to art as much as it applies to science. And by the way, it applies to the investment process too. So we can close that circle all the way back to what we're doing here at Orange Capital Partners, which is running a hedge fund. We see the things that we have a theory about. And this is very important. I've spoken about this before. Very important. You know, when we laugh at people, they don't understand valuations, let's say. They don't understand how to value a company like Tesla or Amazon or those sort of things. And yeah, there's a lot of snake oil, a lot of bullshit, a lot of con artists on Wall Street, but there are some real people who try to understand these things and they can't. And why? It's because, you know, the observations are theory law, and they just have the wrong theory. Mark Andreessen said that once in the context of Facebook. He said people just had the wrong spreadsheets when they looked at Facebook. Now, I'm not sure about that, and that's a whole different conversation. But what he said here, I think where I agree with him is a spreadsheet is sort of a code for theory, or, you know, a concept, something. I wrote an essay about ideas and investment ideas and that sort of thing. The name of the essay is Happy Customers Are Always Right. And in that essay, I spoke about ideas and investment ideas and how the ideas are very, very important. And we throw it around in sort of in common language as yeah, I have an idea and this and that. But ideas are really crucial. Ideas are the fuel of progress. They are the thing that drives progress, that actually allows us to go from A to B. The concept that allows us to put stuff together. Ideas are, you know, they can be, you know, an idea about how to do a sculpture, but they can also be an idea of how to make an electric battery more efficient. So ideas are really crucial, but they start with theories, and there's observation theory. So all of these things apply. You know, once you start closing the circle between the art world and science and technology and investing, you start realizing these things are all the same thing. And while it's a little bit dangerous, of course, to always say, well, it's all the same, because you could kind of fall into the trap of nihilism here. It is very important to keep that thought that those are similar things, and then of course distinguish when it matters. So of course there's a difference between Alberto Giacometti sitting in his studio and painting a portrait and me investing money. There's a huge difference, but at some point these processes in subtle ways are very similar. And I'm very happy to be able to see that and incorporate that in my work, because on the one hand it allows me to think about these things in a more, well, let's call it intelligent way. So I'm not frustrated, let's say, if I don't understand something. In other words, if I don't understand something, the question then is, okay, maybe I just have the wrong theory, or my observation doesn't match my thoughts. So maybe the observation's wrong, or maybe my thoughts are wrong. So if I look at, let's say, a company, concrete example, if I look at a company, Twilio is a company. It's a company I don't understand. I don't understand the company. I don't understand its valuation. I don't understand nothing about that company. But that company has done really well, and has, you know, it has had a much higher market cap than it has today, but it's still doing incredibly well. So I have two options here. I can either change my observation. So in other words, I have to look, let's say, I can't look at valuation, or I'm just looking at the wrong things because I can't explain what the company does, or I have to change my theory about it. In other words, maybe I just don't understand the technology behind it, so I have to educate myself a little bit deeper into the actual technology and so forth. Let me give another example. So Microsoft, I think that's a company I understand incredibly well. And the reason I understand Microsoft incredibly well is because I think I look at the right things there. What do I mean with that? So Microsoft is a great example, actually, because when you listen to Satya Nadella and their corporate presentations, I would say 90% of it's just corporate gibberish. It means nothing. So then you could argue, well, how can you understand the company where most of what they tell you is corporate gibberish? Well, it's because looking at an investor presentation is not the right place to look. What you should be looking at Microsoft is at their customers, which, by the way, you should be looking at in most other companies too. But in this case, who are their customers and why are they buying Microsoft products? And the old saying, you're never going to get fired for having a Microsoft product, is really important. So the CTO of Merrill Lynch will use Microsoft, and that allows Microsoft to grow their business. And that is the real business value of Microsoft, because Microsoft created a software business in the 70s and 80s, and they are still riding on that train. They might be, at some point they will be maybe disrupted, but right now we're not at that case. I don't want to talk about Microsoft here. I just use it as an example of how, if you look at the right place and you have the right theory, then once these things match, you start understanding things. In fact, that is what understanding means. It is when observation and theory match. That's what understanding actually means. And this is why, let's say, this Giacometti book is so valuable to me, because it showed me through the lens of a seemingly harmless piece of art. It's just a sculpture from the early 20th century. And you read his biography and you think about his pieces and you go see them. I'm fortunate, having grown up in Switzerland, that there's a lot of places where you can see. The Baylor Foundation in Basel has lots of Giacomettis, and there's exhibitions in Zurich all the time, and then occasionally you see them in the U.S. You look at these pieces, you think about it, and then you start developing this understanding of what it means to understand art, and then you transpose it to other areas, and this notion, this is this is the summary. This is the conclusion of this episode. Okay, understanding means when observation and theory match. That's what understanding means. And I don't care. You might think, well, that's obvious. To me, that's not obvious. It's a subtle point. It's a small definition maybe, but it's a huge step for me, because it explains to me in a practical way the sentence, I don't understand. I don't understand just means I either look at the wrong places or I have the wrong theory to understand what I'm looking at. But anything I look at always has a theory behind it. And the theory is also influenced by what I look at. Thank you.